or Leviticus 20. Let's call this one Molech and maybe subtitle it Truth. Molech, because we've talked in previous lessons about Molech, the Canaanite idol that was going to eventually tempt the Israelites to sacrifice their own kids to a false god. Likewise, this discussion of Molech is going to extend the conversation into the scope of their responsibility to report what they see, which is a corollary I don't think I have to go into a lot of detail to explain, is so relevant to these times, even if it doesn't have to deal with actual child sacrifice. Anyway, beginning in verse 1, it's going to say, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn in Israel who gives any of his children to Molech shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I myself will set my face against that man and will cut him off from amongst his people, because he has given one of his children to Molech, to make my sanctuary unclean and profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do at all close their eyes to that man when he gives one of his children to Molech, and do not put him to death, then I will set my face against that man and against his clan, and will cut them off from among their people, him and all who follow him in whoring after Molech. That's what we call, in modern terms, a duty to report. And it implicates our identity as Christians in the sense that there are standards with which even secular government realizes, look, you got a duty to open your mouth and tell the truth when you see certain things going wrong. And it's going to come into a certain amount of friction with passages like this in the Proverbs, which say, whoever covers an offense seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates close friends. That's Proverbs 17:9. But look, we've all got a certain degree of common sense that says, look, in my personal matters, I don't have to repeat what someone's done to me if I'm looking to make peace with that individual in a non-criminal aspect. However, that can be used as an excuse to stay silent in situations where you know someone has been victimized and may potentially be victimized again if you stay silent. And so understand, these questions are not easy, because sometimes even when the logic of the matter is easy, the actual difficulty comes in the doing, because we live in a culture now where the whole concept we've talked about before in sermons and in weeks past, snitches get stitches, is a thing that is not just a concept of street justice. It is stretched into law enforcement and even into churches. We are in a time where silence is golden. It's almost considered a litmus test of loyalty, no matter what the level of wrongdoing. And so in a culture where silence is kind of the litmus test for fellowship and being included in certain circles, it can be difficult, even when you see someone suffering, clearly being done wrong, to speak up. It's not so much an issue, once again, of logically understanding what you should do, as understanding whether or not you're willing to take on the burden of being potentially isolated with that person you should probably speak up on behalf of. But understand this. This goes back to something that the law has emphasized in another place when we were talking about the guilt offering in Leviticus 5, beginning of verse 1, where it says, if anyone sins in that he hears a public adjuration to testify, and though he is a witness, whether he has seen or come to know the matter, yet does not speak, he shall bear his iniquity. And so we're looking at times when, as Christians, sometimes we lose touch with these old covenant principles, because old stuff can be easy to kind of just dismiss. But these are the foundations of who you are supposed to be as a believer, if you are a believer in Christ. And in many ways, these are things that people just understand, just make for basic integrity, whether you believe in God or not. And so to the degree that we live in a society that even has laws, even if those laws are not enforced properly, to say there are certain things that you need to speak up on to prevent people from being victimized, then we need to understand that, just as we often say, we need to, as James says, pray to God for wisdom in times when we lack it, because God knows it's not always easy to understand logically when we should speak and when we should be silent, because there is a certain time where silence has its role. We aren't supposed to necessarily go talking about everything we see, but there is a time to speak up, and God is the one who can help us when we are legitimately confused about when that time is, because there are situations when even the pagans understand that we're not being silent for any good reason other than trying to save our own skin. So God willing, we will have both the strength and the wisdom to know when to speak up and make it clear that we are living according to God's standard and protecting those who need our help.